NSW. Married people of Reddit. What is some creepy advice that you were given on your wedding day by a friend or relative? My mill told me if I keep acting smart it wouldn't last long, and the secret to her 25 years of marriage is always act dumb around the husband. Met her husband's mistress few years later. She was a successful lawyer with a PhD. Don't forget to work the clit. She'll be a happy bride forever. I miss the days when my grandma would only give gardening tips or baking tips. That's creepy but quite a good one. I had a drunk old lecture cousin say to me, "You're gonna frick her good tonight." Yeah, frick her real good at the after party. My mill set up this Jenga set at our wedding where people could write messages, so when if we play we would have the memories of the day. My wife's uncle wrote "suck his dong." Classy. Not me, but at my friend's wedding. She has a super religious section of the family. Like of the 5 siblings, one is a priest, one is a nun, and one is a volunteer youth pastor on the side. The priest uncle said, "Just because you're married now doesn't mean you can be lustful. Just remember that sex always under the eyes our Lord." Her husband is a sex toy designer. Her husband is a sex toy designer. We need an AMA from this dude. Not advice, but my new father-in-law dropped us off at the airport after our wedding and said, "Bring me back a grandson." Jesus, how long was the holiday? My wife's mother told her at her first marriage, never turn him down when he wants it, otherwise he'll start to stray. I feel like this advice was given to a lot of women back in the day. Dangerous for sure, but pretty common. Comparatively tame, but the "she's always right" sentiment of a lot of older couples is insane. Like, Donald, you spend 6 hours a day away from home because you can't communicate with your wife and you refuse to actually treat your daughter like a person with her own thoughts. Don't pretend like your advice is worth jack crap. My Uncle Joe told me and my husband, "You gotta be willing to lose an argument." He was married 50 years. We said, "I'll do an Uncle Joe" when we wanted to end an argument. Worked for us. My sisters-in-laws told her to be understanding if at one point their boy had a GF. It's something men do when they don't feel loved or cared for at home. They have different needs, and as long as they still provide for their home, it'll be okay. You can guess how faithful my Bill's dad was in that marriage. Not creepy, but my in-laws pulled me aside and tried to guilt trip me into agreeing to spend more holidays with them than with my parents. Careful with that. This happened to a friend of mine and he goes with his in-laws more than his own parents. I see his parents every now and then and they are sad about how he never spends the holidays with them. My Bill, married into this family also, leaned in and whispered, "Well, they can't get rid of you now." Didn't realize that it was less joking camaraderie and more of a warning of my in-laws' attitude towards the people their children marry. I was allies with all the married into people in my ex-boyfriend's family. His mom was difficult when she wanted to be. Read, a rampant narcissist. Fortunately, my husband's parents are exactly the same kind of lovably crazy as mine. It works well. I'm not sure I would classify it as creepy, but my grandmother told me to figure out how my husband liked his pillows arranged. Her reasoning was he would want a sense of normalcy for the first night. I'm pretty sure most guys, myself included, answer to how to arrange the pillows is put them on the bed vaguely where my head goes. No, really creepy, but my mum told me marriage is like a game of cards. You start with 2 hearts and a diamond in your hand, but by the end you're begging for a club and a spade. That's quite the optimistic outlook. One of my cousins got married when he was 30-ish. My aunt, his mom, one of the most awkward people I've ever met, decided the morning of his wedding was finally the time to explain how sex worked and gave him some quack drops that were advertised to make his penis bigger. She made the assumption that the drops were needed based on his dad, her ex-husband. The cousins were never supposed to know about this, but his brother overheard and immediately texted all of us. So, not quite the scenario in the question, but easily the best advice that anyone gave us. My grandmother pulled us aside and said, "Kids, everyone is going to give you advice about how to be a married couple. Smile, nod, say, thank you so much, then go right ahead and do whatever in the heck you were going to do." My wife and I had been loving together 8 years at this point, looked at each other, then we looked at her, smiled, nodded, and replied, Thank you so much. She just laughed and hugged us. I really miss her. Dang, she had your back as a couple. Sorry for your loss. I was at a rehearsal dinner before a family member's wedding, and there was an open mic for giving speeches at the dinner. One of their grandmothers gets up, says happy fricking and then sits back down. Haha, she's been waiting to bust that one out. I had a lovely heart-to-heart with my father-in-law before my wedding, which consisted of him telling me to not let his 20-year-old son get too drunk. That's really all he said. Nothing about treating his daughter well, nothing. Not that scary but pretty sad. Her family sucks. LOL. Could be he trusts you but not a 20-year-old. Bridesmaid to my wife on our wedding day. Statistically, you are now 3 times more likely to die at the hands of your new husband than a stranger. I mean, she's not wrong. At my wedding, my old high school teacher told me not to blow it on her face tonight. He is a super cool guy and was just messing around. However, it was great advice. This is definitely the creepiest one of the bunch. So not given to me directly but to my ex-wife. My ex was from another country, so there was a bit of a delay before she met my mother. When they did, my mom decided to hand off a ton of How to Love Your Black Man books to my ex. My ex, not wanting to start anything between me and my mother, hid them. I found them one day and Jesus, those were some absolute freaking cringe. Also doesn't help that my mom is white. So like, is this the type of crap she was reading when she was dating predominantly black guys? Most of it was just some perfect 50s wife mixed with bull fantasy. Almost just really made me see my mother in another very unfavorable light. Whoa, I can only imagine when you thought they were your wife's, then found out they came from your mother. What an emotional roller coaster. Pretty common in my culture. Parents do not tell their children about sex ever. When the children get married, the very next day they ask you about a baby and when will it come. Thank God for the internet, more people know about sex. This is like parents who insist their kids can't date, but then suddenly switch and ask why they're single and not married. I have a few, but keep in mind both me and my wife were inexperienced when we got married. 1. At the wedding family luncheon. Wife's relative. Do you feel it yet? I'm not sure about the premise of the question, but I assume she meant something like, do you feel different now that you are married? Wife. No, not really. Makes sense, we date for 3 years. My great aunt from across the venue. She will tonight, her words echoed. 2. My sister's best friend. Got us a whole basket of fun to open up on our honeymoon. It was an assortment of condoms, lube, toys, vibrators, dildos, card games, handcuffs, anal toys, a pack of candy panties. Safe to say the inexperienced wife and I were scarred. 3. Her, while shaking my hand, palmed me $40 a condom, most likely pulled out of his wallet, and said enjoy and winked at me. All I know is that highly religious people are weird and kinky. The sister's best friend sounds very generous. Actually, that stuff isn't quite cheap. When I was dating my wife, a few months in, I was working with her dad for some extra spending money. I went to lift something and my father-in-law says, careful with those nuts of yours. You'll need those. I almost dropped what I was lifting. But, you'll need those. While engaged, my then uncle and I was chatting and let me know if she crap talks your size, just flip her over and shove it up her pooper. His words, complete with popping noise. That'll have her screaming, you're huge, you're huge. I learned way more about his, and by proxy my blood aunt's sex life, than I ever wanted to. On the bright side, I was super not surprised when they divorced. That's a paraphrased Sam Kinison routine. Not married, but dating. Was told by a friend, if you break up after you're 25 and want to go into the dating scene again, learn to become a stepdad. 30 and single, that's crap is true as frick. My choices seem limited to girls who still have the maturity and self-confidence of a college freshman, or women who have kids to raise and by principle have limited time for dating. My grandmother gave my husband and I a casual speech on why oral sex is sinful and we shouldn't do it. I have no idea where it came from, and I honestly think I blacked out for the majority of it because I have no idea how I responded. We were just like, okay, cool, sounds good, moving on. Those crazy Catholics. S. Creepy is putting it lightly. My uncle during the reception So, you finally got tired of the I'm not in the mood crap and put a ring on it. Huh, congrats I guess. Yes, he literally thought you couldn't rape who you're married to because, and I quote, that's the whole point in doing it. LMAO, not creepy so much as freaking stupid. But my ex-mill said a daughter is always her parents' daughter, but when a son gets married, he becomes his own man and head of his own family and no longer belongs to his parents, so I asked if that meant they'd stop asking us for money since he wasn't their son anymore. They didn't find it funny, but they also didn't stop asking for money. God, they sucked. This wasn't advice, it was just awkward. My dad presumably did not realize my fiancé and I had been abstinent, and thus were very much looking forward to getting it on. And he asked what are your plans for tonight on my wedding day, as he lives out of state and was hoping to go to a concert with me and my husband before he left. Unfortunately, my plans for the night were not something I felt my dad should hear, so I politely and awkwardly declined with no explanation. What the heck? Of course I'm planning to spend time with your wife on the night of your wedding. That goes for just about all weddings. The only variation is the size and length of the wedding party. Started off badly, got better. In order for your marriage to succeed, you must have a wife and a girlfriend at the same time. But you dang well better make sure it's the same person. He continued. Never stop treating your wife like your girlfriend. The second you stop trying to impress her, the end of your marriage begins. You got me in the first half, not gonna lie. At my friend's wedding, his grandfather stood up and gave them a speech that went something like, every time you try for a baby, put a jelly bean in a jar. Try to fill the jar by the end of your first year. So my friends and I went to the nearest drugstore and bought their entire stock of jelly beans and gave them to the happy couple. Not so whooper on topic, but enjoy today, because one day you're going to wake up and look at that person sleeping beside you in disgust and think, I can't believe I married you. And if you think that's good, wait until you have kids. Yeah, that's when you wake up and say, I can't believe I had kids with you. It's been almost half a year and still haven't thought this, but I remember on my wedding day finding it real audacious, lol. I can sympathize. Lots of projection in the advice I got on my wedding day. All the actual good advice I got was, honestly communicate. Don't buy a house unless you're ready to commit to the area. Having kids makes everything harder, but not necessarily worse. And then scores of she's always right in the end and other dumb bulls. The day after our wedding was my birthday and we were celebrating with family at her parents' place. We knocked on their door and her mother opened up and said sorry, no returns. Still makes me laugh. Not necessarily creepy, but my father-in-law said something to the effect of, if you don't treat her right, then I'll kick your butt. This being a guy who was married 3 times and has 2 children that he is completely estranged from. I didn't object to the sentiment, necessarily, but just coming from someone who clearly gave very few fricks about the sanctity of marriage or familial relationships, it tickled me. Not my wedding day. His grandma was showing deeper signs of dementia when I met her and she passed 2 years ago. For the record, to me this was sweet, but it's technically creepy. When I met her, she's calling herself a witch and needed to talk to me away from the men. She then gives me all the ways to disarm a man if he was acting untoward. My personal favorite was her demoing how to properly grab a man by his nuts, hook your nails, and twist. Her eyes lit up and I'm pretty sure she's done this multiple times. From what I heard, her first husband was a horrible person and she ran away from him with the children. And every time she met me after that, she'd give me a different getaway tactic and to let her know if her grandson wasn't treating me right, she said she'd make him into stew. Perfect grandma advice. My wife's uncle at the reception handed me a doobie and said if you'll do one of these per day together, everything will be great. 22 years later, he was right. Finally some wholesome content. I was told that Jesus was a third partner in a marriage and it would be good to have a picture representation of Jesus in the bedroom. Read this as Jesus like it was a Hispanic name. He's a great third partner. When I got married I asked my grandpa for advice since the man's been married for like 6 decades. He said, and I crap you not, frick around every once in a while. It'll keep things fresh. Needless to say I did not. Then again, we got divorced 3 years later, so maybe I should have heeded his advice. Not sure. Your grandfather was a bad person. Thrust it into her butt, real hard. She will love it, my friend said to me a day before the wedding. I wasn't even asking for an advice on our night. We were talking about the cake and suddenly he bring that up. So were those instructions for the cake or? Not really creepy, but my aunt who was the MC of the wedding said many times to have many children. Like it's tradition to say it cause my mom comes from a family of 12 kids and my late grandpa would say some quote from the Bible about it. But she said it a lot. Have many children, little girls and boys have children soon. Guess I should have told her we're not having kids beforehand. I figured it wasn't anyone's business, so awkward. I made this mistake of a joke once. 10 years later the heartbroken couple were looking into adoption. A friend told me to take painkillers on my wedding night because sex is so painful, and my SOS friend told him you have to use lube every time you have sex. We were both really glad we had already had sex, but both felt bad for our friends' sex lives. Also lots of weird comments about getting pregnant, which was very much not wanted. Not married, but my MILF figure, boyfriend of several years mom, told me that I don't have to use birth control if I know my body was 19 or 20 at the time. I'm glad I was smart enough to ignore her advice, especially considering that she gave birth to my boyfriend and planned at 19. My favorite is a wedding toast. As you begin your married life, you find there's something you will enjoy. You will enjoy it in ways you never knew possible before. Countless variety day after day. Hamburger. I don't know if this is creepy to everyone, but it was creepy to me. An old uncle pulled me aside and said, "Listen, I'm going to make your life very easy. Just let her make all the decisions." I was like, frick that. I didn't get married to be a doormat, or to have a doormat, for that matter, either. I married a person. As a woman, I would freaking hate that advice. I don't mind making decisions plans if I have something solid in mind, but outside of that it really isn't my favorite thing. My BF is the sweetest guy in the world, is way too good for me, but if there is one thing that drives me a little bonkers, it's that he tries to get me to decide things for us just a bit too often. So very good for you. My aunt and uncle told us to argue naked. It saves time. It wasn't entirely the worst advice, but it doesn't work well on legit problems. But it diffuses stupid arguments pretty quickly. My aunt is like 10 years older than me, meaning she was 29, so it wasn't that creepy. My very naive grandpa, who was the pastor at my wedding, said sometimes when you get a creaky door in your relationship, all you need is some love lubricant. He himself was referring to WD-40, but of course this was said during the ceremony in front of everyone, who I knew was thinking about KY jelly. As the bride, I knew that if I laughed, everyone else would. Everyone was talking about it later at the reception. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.